Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. I'm speaking with Lord Fusitu'a. Welcome, Lord Fusitu'a.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate the invitation. It's a privilege to be here. I was not taken aback because we've had a chat before and a good dialogue. So yeah, I was very much looking forward to the invitation, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining. This is a podcast all about Bitcoin, as you can probably guess from the title. And really the interest that I bring is in people's personal journeys and trying to understand what turns people into what we now call Bitcoiners. And from the story that you told previously, I think it would be a wonderful, wonderful episode. And I look forward to hearing your story again. And I'm sure there'll be some elements to it that I didn't hear the first time around. So for those that don't know, could you give a brief introduction of what you're up to at the moment? And we'll then dive into what brought you to today.
Yep. So my name's Lord Fusitu'a. I'm one of the 33 hereditary title lords in the Kingdom of Tonga. We have a system similar to Great Britain with a royal family and various houses of lords and a constitutional monarchy. So the relevance of the lords are that there is a place that is constitutionally set aside for them in the legislature. I only just recently vacated my seat in the legislature. I was the serving Lord member for my constituency, and due to being away in New Zealand for a couple of years straight for unavoidable medical treatment, which was life-saving to begin with, I thought it best to vacate my seat rather than continue taking a public salary while being in absentia. So during my tenure as a domestic or national politician, I was recruited by a number of international parliamentary bodies who asked or viewed my skill set as being in congruence with their aims. So I was recruited as the chairman of GOPAC, which is the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, for Oceania. So that covers Australasia, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, all the way up to the US West Coast. So what we do is we set up anti-corruption institutions in countries that do not have them, anti-corruption commissions, anti-corruption oversight committees in their Congress or their parliament or legislature on the one hand, and then because we are the legislative arm to the UNODC or the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes executive law enforcement arm, we work together with them to trace illicit financial flows throughout the world. So with NATO, we trace the financial flows that go to the Middle East, particularly to ISIS. With Interpol, we trace the financial flows that come out of southern China, the China whites, and human trafficking, illicit finances that flow through Southeast Asia into the Pacific and eventually up to the US West Coast, where the China white heroin and human traffic is destined for. Then we trace back the other way, the Sinaloa, Cali, and Juarez cartel cocaine illicit financial flows that come out of South America, headed through the Pacific up into Asia and back up into the Americas, into the US West Coast. So it's a fairly comprehensive job. It's related to Bitcoin later, as I'll mention, insofar as the FUD about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies being the currency of crime, which I'll deal with later, and as well as the AML and money laundering issues. So the second international parliamentary organisation I was recruited to was the Commonwealth Secretariat. So the Commonwealth Secretariat, which runs the Commonwealth out of Marlborough House in London, is run by Baroness Patricia Scotland, formerly Tony Blair's Attorney General in his new Labor government. I was appointed the head of the Parliamentary Pacific Group on Human Rights, excuse me, for our region. So I do climate change, gender, anti-violence against women and girls, LGBTIQ plus advocacy throughout the Commonwealth, and issues for aged care and for youth. So that spans the globe. That has some relevance to Bitcoin in that the climate change work we do, one half is geared towards amending the UN Refugees Convention, which was written after World War II to protect Jews fleeing Nazi Germany. So focuses highly on conflict refugees, religious persecution refugees, but strangely, because it was never updated, does not deal with climate refugees. So if your country suddenly sinks tonight, you'll be stateless because you won't be recognised as a refugee anywhere in the world. So we're working towards changing that, and more relevant to Bitcoin, we do assessments across industrial sectors in all the Commonwealth countries as to their carbon footprints in relation to the commitments they made at the Paris Agreement. So if they're maintaining the 1.5 degrees increase in global warming, and how that relates to Bitcoin mining. So those are my main current jobs. I'm of course an intellectual property, banking and finance attorney, barrister by trade, and have been so for going on 3 decades now. So with that background and a long time background in fintech, I also have some private business interests in a number of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency operations globally, which we can discuss later as we get to what I'm up to now. So the way I got to Bitcoin was
Lord Fusitu'a, if I could jump in at that point. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's always quite amazing to me what people do with their lives. You don't know what opportunity is going to come up next. You don't know where your training is going to take you. You don't know who you're going to meet. You just don't know what's going to happen, basically. And that's one of the exciting things about, following things that you're curious about. You mentioned that. So you basically work in a number of roles at the moment, but you must have taken a bunch of steps to get to those points. So at the very end of your opening introduction there, you mentioned that you were a trained barrister. So can we zoom back in time and have a chat about that? So what got you into law? When did you actually train in it? What was exciting about it? And a little bit of like early life and what growing up in Tonga was like, and even further back, perhaps like this concept of a hereditary title. Like I'd love to learn about that as well.
Sure. Yep. So I was actually born and raised in Australia. My parents were at the Australian National University in Canberra in the 1960s to go to grad school. So my mother was at grad school and my father was at law school in the 1960s at ANU. So they had me in 1971 and ended up settling there. They knew at the back of their minds they would eventually have to go back, but Canberra's a great place to raise children. It's quiet. The Australian educational system is a good one. So they brought all their siblings over on both sides, educated them, got them jobs, got them settled there. So the large part of my immediate family is still overseas. So my grandfather passed away when I was about 10 or 11. That meant that constitutionally my father had then inherited the title. So we had to go back to Tonga for him to take up his duties as the 22nd Lord Fusitu'a. I'm the 23rd. So he went back. He was installed with the title from the king. So that involves inheriting a title, landed estates, which for his title are an island, the northernmost island in our archipelago group. So the northernmost islands are newer for all, which are closer to Samoa and Fiji than they are to Tonga. So we get back, he inherits the title. I have to move back to Canada, to Tonga, begin going to school there. I can't speak Tongan. Have to learn to speak on the fly. Dad gets elected into Parliament as a Lord member, becomes the Speaker of the House, and then remains the longest serving Speaker, Parliamentary Lord Speaker that our country's ever had. So my mother comes back. The reason she was at grad school is that she was the first Tongan woman to ever earn a university degree. Before that, Tongan women were not allowed to go to university. So she was the first Tongan woman graduate, first Tongan woman postgraduate, first Tongan woman head of a government department, first Tongan woman member in cabinet, first Tongan woman member in Privy Council.
Wow.
So, yeah, so they're fairly busy people and fairly big shoes to fill. So,
I was going to say a bit of pedigree to follow there. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? Jeez, it's a hard act to follow. So they're busy with that. I get sent back out. I spent a couple of years in Tonga.
Mm-hmm. And so just briefly, so when you moved back there and you didn't speak Tongan, like roughly how old were you at the time? And that's always, I imagine, like really tough trying to readjust.
Oh, you get bullied and ridiculed. So what I did was I got bullied so bad.
Wow.
I vowed that I was going to come top. So we have national exams every year because it's a small place. You have a national curriculum. Every school doesn't have their own curriculum. There's one that's rolled out across all schools in the country.
Sure.
So your exams are measured nationally. So I decided at that point that I was going to come top in the Tongan language exams nationwide until I left the country. So that's what I did. So I just studied Tongan until, until I could recite the entire textbooks. I'd have no idea what they meant, but I memorized them by rote so that for the next 3 years before I left Tonga, I came top in the nation in the Tongan exam for those years. Then I left. Having learnt Tongan then was integral in forging an identity that was distinctly Tongan. Until then, I still felt like a diaspora kid who's just back for the holidays. After learning Tongan, then Tonga then became home.
Mm-hmm.
So because our education system is not too bad. I mean, we have the highest literacy rate in the world and the highest number of PhDs per capita on the planet in the Guinness Book of Records, apparently. But individual development. My parents felt I was getting bored because I would just come top of every subject and every class, and I was beginning to lose interest in study. And idle hands are the devil's playground. So they'd seen a tendency that I might misbehave. So I got sent away to boarding school. So I came to New Zealand, went to King's College, went to boarding school there, matriculated, and then went back to ANU in Canberra, which is where I was born. So all my friends are back there. And then, just why did I go to become a lawyer? To be honest, I matriculated around 86, 87. And apart from Miami Vice, the other main show on television was a show called LA Law. And in LA Law, everyone went to work wearing an Armani suit. So I decided I want to work somewhere where I get to wear an Armani suit to work every day. So I thought, what job is it that I get to wear an Armani bespoke or a Savile Row bespoke suit to work every day? So apparently that's what lawyers did. So I ended up deciding to become a lawyer. That sounds facetious, and to an extent it is. I've always been interested in the law, interested in applying sets of socially agreed upon rules to fact matrices that did not necessarily fit those rules, and how do you reconcile when that occurs. I'd found that fascinating as a child. I was a language, my undergraduate degree is in linguistics and literature, so I was a language specialist, and the etymology of languages. So, which is your main tool effectively as a barrister. As a solicitor, paper lawyer, it's a different skill set. But being able to apply the law as well as stand up and make an argument and think on your feet with an uncomfortable wig on your head and these funny gowns that you've got to wear at the same time, I always found an interesting challenge. So, graduated.
It's great. If I could just jump in, the whole point of these conversations, what I'm very keen on is, first of all, I haven't given you a set of pre-assigned questions. It's supposed to be natural, right? And by explaining that story about LA law and wanting to wear an Armani suit, like, fuck yeah, that's the whole point of these conversations. It's about the personality and character of different people coming through, and that's exactly what that is. So I love that. Thanks for sharing that.
I'm glad.
And how does that then, how does that blend into having more of a banking and fintech focus? Like, how did that develop?
So I developed a specialty. My specialty is intellectual property and telecommunications.
Okay.
So in order to bolster that, I did what's called graduate law. So in America, all law is graduate law because you can't go straight from high school to law school. In America, you don't go into law school unless you've already got a degree. So in the Antipodes, you can go straight in, but I went in as a graduate. So they let me pursue in what would in a liberal arts degree be considered a double major. So in a law degree, you usually only specialize in one thing. But because I had a strong enough background in my earlier degrees, and because I graduated with the gold medal as the highest graduate in the entire university, they thought I could handle the workload.
Well done. Wow.
So yeah, so they said, okay, intellectual property.
Bring your suit. Come with us.
Yeah, precisely. So intellectual property and telecommunications on the one hand, and banking and finance on the other. So this was all geared towards being headhunted by a company, a firm called Freehills. They're like they're the LA Law in Australia. So it just so happened that one of the senior partners' sons was one of my best friends. I finished up the degree. I got headhunted. So just before graduation, the major law firms come through and take the top 2% of all the law schools. And it's basically like being a college basketball player in America. They come and scout you, and then they'll take you to their law firm, walk you around the place, tell you how much you like it, what your bonuses are going to be. So I had that done to me. I was locked and ready to go to Freehills. But I began in Canberra immediately after graduation, and before doing what are called profs, or your clerkship, in a traditional British Commonwealth setup would be you'd go to chambers after having become a solicitor and then do a clerkship, by which you would get your letters and therefore be admitted to the bar.
Right.
Under the Australian system in the ACT, you actually have to do another degree. So you have to do a graduate diploma in like a JD, legal studies, where you go and work as well as do both practical and written examinations. So I did that. And then after that, I actually began, before going to Freehills, doing pro bono work for legal aid in Canberra. So you go down and it's basically a free-for-all. I'll take any lawyers that are willing to give billable hours for free. So you just stand there and it's literally like on the TV.
Wow.
There's a whole cell full of accused, and you get assigned a number. The person comes up. You only just meet them right then and there. You get to talk to them for about 5 minutes before they go to be arraigned. So yeah, you've got to learn about their case on that walk along the corridor, and try and figure out some resolution for them, whether it's a continuance to get the case delayed, or there may be evidence that you can put forth immediately that should allow the case to be dismissed without ever going to hearing. But what they do is, as each case comes through, if you see the person and you recognize them and you're in any way connected to them, then you tell the caseload worker, oh, look, well, there's a conflict of interest. I can't represent this person. So it got to the stage where every second person coming through, they'd go, oh, it's a home invasion. I bring the guy through and I go, oh, that's my cousin. I can't do this case.
Wow.
And 2 cases later, there'd be a B and E, and they'd come through and I go, no, that's my cousin. I can't do this case either. So 2 cases later, someone had come through for chaining a ATM to a truck and driving off with the ATM. And I go, no, that's my cousin too. I can't do this, guys. So after about half my extended family coming through, the legal aid officers were like, we really appreciate your volunteering, but yeah, maybe it's not a good fit.
Wow.
So I ended up going and working with the most well-respected criminal defence barrister, I think, on the eastern seaboard in Australia. There's a guy named Jack Pappas. So he and I trained together, do boxing at the same gym, and he knew, as with most Polynesians, the Tongan, I won a Tongan scholarship to go to university. So my parents could have paid, but they said, yeah, you earned the scholarship, so use it. So a Tongan scholarship's about enough to feed a cat. So as with a lot of people, I had to work through all of my degrees. And like most Polynesians, I worked as a bouncer. That's what Polynesian guys do, because we hit our adult size at about 15, and we stay at that size. And we're very polite and respectful to customers, which owners of bars like. We don't start fights. We try and talk people down. So yeah, so I worked at that, and this barrister was good friends with a fellow doorman. So he took me in and we boxed together. And he's the criminal defence attorney for all the organised crime families on the eastern seaboard of Australia, all the bikie gangs, alleged organised crime families. So yeah, it was fascinating to work with him. Criminal law is fascinating because the adage that truth is stranger than fiction, as cliche as it may be, is absolutely true. You cannot make some of these things up that people are willing to or get up to doing. So yeah, I was working with him and got the offer from Freehills with a 6-figure salary, and was ready, had already put the down payment on the Porsche and the apartment.
Shipped the suit in from Italy.
Yeah, in Point Piper in Sydney, on the eastern suburbs. And my father rang me and said, sorry, buddy, you're coming back to Tonga to work for $7,000 a year as a government lawyer.
Wow.
So yeah, I dumped everything and went back to Tonga at my father's behest, because that's how this life that we're in, duty comes before everything. So yeah, took the Porsche back.
Sorry, Lord Fusitu'a, I'd like to jump in at that point, because I was intrigued by, so you're the 23rd Lord Fusitu'a, is that correct? And you've touched on again nicely here the sense of duty you feel towards this role. It is a hereditary role, so perhaps you could explain a little bit about the history of it and the importance of it within Tonga.
Yeah, so Tongan, the current Tongan royal family is the same family that's ruled us since 840 AD. Wow. So it's an unbroken line of succession, just under 20,000, well, just under 1,300 years. So over 1,000 years, father to son, father to son, father to son. So we are one of only 2 BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or people of colour, nations on the planet that were never colonized. So us and Ethiopia,
Wow.
same royal family from the beginning. So my title goes back about 1,000 years to the first Lord Fusitu'a, who was the grandson of the king at the time. The king at the time had heard of a rebellion from the northernmost island, the Niuafo'ou, which is where I'm now from, but we were originally from the seat of the Tuikana dynasty, which is in the western part of the main island. So one of his grandsons was called We'ikaetau. In Tonga, that means literally the war trigger, which means if you look at this guy the wrong way, he'll go to war, he'll kill you on the spot, and then he'll go to war and wipe out anyone that's ever met you. So he sent that kid up to go and quell the rebellion, kill the chief who had led it, and reclaim Niua, the northernmost island, because Europe didn't establish the nation state until after the Prussian War. There was no such political entity as a nation state until after the Prussian War. We established the nation state in 950 AD, a central government.
Wow.
With definitive borders, with a homogenous ethnic population who all recognized the central rule of one government. So yeah, that nation state precedes the European one by a good, 900 odd years.
Wow.
So so the borders of the nation state were re-established. The local rule, which is an essential part of the nation state, is that the central rule is recognized by local governments in the outer reaches of the kingdom. So if you read Tongan history, or if you go to that pinned tweet on my account, Tonga actually had an empire that extended pretty much the entire Pacific Ocean for centuries.
Wow.
From Tahiti, which is 1,500 miles to our east, to Wallis and Futuna, Fiji, Samoa. Tonga was essentially like England. We were small and resource poor because most of Tonga are coral atolls. So they have no natural resources. But what we had was a really good navy and a really good army. So we basically did what the British did. A small country with a good navy and good army ended up taking over the entire region. So the British, not copying us, but did the exact same thing 900 years later and built the British Empire along exactly the same principles that we built ours. Because we had to get wood from Fiji because they have ironwood, we don't. So we can't build our 200-person war canoe without Fijian ironwood. So we annexed them so that they'd become our forestry department. Then Samoa has volcanic soil, so it's much more fertile than ours. So just as the World Bank and the IMF turn South America into a plantation, we turned Samoa into a plantation and fed Tonga with crops from Samoa. So yeah, it's basically very similar to what the British did with the British Empire. So in modern times, the current dynasty, the current king is the 6th king in the current iteration of a dynasty which is of the same family, but in a new form. So blood-wise, there is an unbroken tie from 1840 till today.
Oh.
But what happened was our very first kings are considered God kings. So we believe the God Tonga came down, had relations with a mortal woman, produced our first Tu'i Tonga, the king of Tonga, who was a demigod. And then from then on, everyone else, all the royal lines descend.
Wow.
So it got to a stage where the demigods decided, well, we're tired of this running the country thing. We're just going to sit back and be demigods, and we'll let our sons run the country. So that's how the second dynasty arose. It was the sons of the main line. Then it got to the stage where they said, okay, we're going to be temporal rulers ourselves. We're going to sit back and just be worshipped, and we'll let our sons do the secular running of the government. And today is the sons of that group. Okay. So they've been in power for the last, since the 17th century. Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing history. It's also interesting the similarities with humans in completely different ends of the world.
That's right. Very much.
The characteristics of man to search for more fertile ground, to hunt for better forestry, to build institutions or hierarchies. It's so interesting, and especially given the context of Bitcoin and how disruptive that all is. Well, exactly. Technology. You mentioned your war canoe. I'm sure that would be fearsome at the time. And so
the reason that set us apart was Tongans could navigate by the stars.
Wow.
We learned that the constellations were at particular places at particular times of the year, and that's how we navigated the Pacific.
Look at that. And that in itself is a technology in a sense, isn't it?
Exactly.
Wow, exactly. How interesting. And so to fast forward to today, like how many people are in Tonga? How many it's one island? I mean, just a bit of context, please, in terms of today's
absolutely.
Today's world.
So it's an archipelago of 169 islands, about 36 of which are inhabited. The archipelago stretches across.
So how many islands did you say?
169 islands.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
The total land mass, if you put them all together, is 731 square kilometers. So land is the most scarce asset when you're an archipelago nation.
Yeah.
So spanning a 700-kilometer stretch of land and sea across the Pacific, slightly to the southwest of Fiji and Samoa, and to the northeast of Australia and New Zealand. Okay. So the population's 100,000 people on island, and that's been the population since about World War II. Our birth rate and our death rate is almost equivalent. Sorry, our birth rate is almost equivalent to our death rate and our migration rate. So it's kept the population steady, which has meant that scarcity of land has not been a problem, because that's what usually would be a problem in a place like ours is there are too many people and there's not enough land. But Tongans are migratory, so there's 100,000 on island, but there's nearly 400,000 in the diaspora elsewhere in the world. So there are more Tongans overseas than in Tonga. And Tonga, sorry?
I was going to say, so I have, this is an excellent segue to a part of the story that I want to cover for sure, which is a bit of context that you gave in the Twitter spaces that we were part of. But why is Bitcoin important to the average Tongan on the street today?
Bitcoin is important to the average Tongan on the street today, not as a consumer investment choice, as it is in an OECD country, as some sort of digital gold where you can store your value as a hedge against inflation. Bitcoin is important to the person on the street in Tonga because Tonga is the most GDP remittance dependent country on the planet. So Tonga's GDP is made up of 40.1% remittances. So nearly half of our GDP is money sent back by other Tongans who live and work abroad. Wow. So that effectively means our largest export and most lucrative export is our people.
Is talent, yeah.
So they live overseas, they send money back. Our GDP in 2021 was 510 million USD. Of that, 40.1%, or 200 million, was in remittances. The problem is only 130 million of that 200 million reached Tongan pockets, because 30%, or 70 million, is scraped by Western Union, the other remittance industry companies, and the banks. So 30% is taken in fees alone.
Wow.
So if you send $100 to Tonga, only 70 is going to get there.
Wow. Wow.
Now,
actually, you mentioned the story of, I remembered it so well. Family members in Brisbane, they're working, they get the $100, they want to send it to their family member back in Tonga. Their family member might be in a village and they have to jump on an Uber that costs them $10 to get into town. They then have to go to Western Union.
Not an Uber.
Or not an
get
Uber,
in a
but
bus.
like...
A bus that takes 5 hours.
Yeah, go on. Talk me through that.
80 other people on the bus. Yeah.
It shouldn't be me telling that story. So just physically, what does it mean? So I'm in Brisbane, I'm Tongan, I'm sending $100 back to my brother. What does that actually look like for the brother back in Tonga?
So if he's in the village where the airport is, for Motu, that means a 5-hour bus ride to town. That costs him $10. He gets to town, he'll wait for 3 hours in line at Western Union. He'll have to take his passport with him, if he's got one, or he'll have to find someone in the village who has a passport to get the money sent to them. Because the reason we have 60% unbanked people don't drive, poor people don't drive, so they don't have a driver's license. They don't fly anywhere, so they don't have a passport. So they can't get KYC to have a bank account. The same applies to Western Union. Very often you'll need to find someone in the village and you'll tell your brother in Brisbane to send it to his name.
Right.
Because you can only collect money if you show a government ID. So he'll have to pay for the guy and himself to go in the 5-hour bus ride.
Wow.
The guy will show his ID, get the money. He'll have to give the guy a cut of the money for doing that for him. Another $10 and another 5 hours back to the village. So this is about 13 hours now. The girl at the counter said, sorry, it's not 100, it's only 70 because we take 30. So 70 minus 2 bus rides worth 20 each. That's $30 left. So yeah, if he's lucky, he'll have $20 left after a 15-hour day, going all the way to town and back.
Wow.
Or he can sit in his living room and have his brother zap it to him in Bitcoin on the Lightning Network, and he receives it instantly, cross borders, peer-to-peer, no intermediaries, for free.
Wow. I mean, that is profound.
That's why it's important.
That's just massive.
Yeah, it will reclaim 1/3 of the 40% of our GDP that these value scrapers take from the poorest people who can't afford it.
I mean, excuse me, it's just mind-blowing that people, first of all, have to go through that process in the first place. And something like Western Union is not seen as, in my eyes anyway, a lecherous business per se, but remittance is in a sense extremely important role to play, obviously getting money around the world, but they're taking the piss, aren't they? I mean, what a joke. That whole process is egregious.
It's a combination of things. One, they're taking the piss. Two, if you saw Jack Mallard's interviews with Peter McCormack,
yep,
I think he's had about his fourth one now, about El Salvador. He'll tell you, if Western Union could afford to make it free, they would. They can't. They've got 12 intermediaries they have to pay to get the money. So on the one hand, they're being unscrupulous, but they're unavoidable costs of sending money in fiat using those rails. That's just how those rails work.
Wow. And so the very idea that as a country, you can actually, basically, you can start to make what, $70 million that you didn't previously have in the country overnight if you use Bitcoin on Lightning.
Exactly. So what does that do? What does that look like?
Yeah, go on. Talk to me about that. So I mean, obviously, this must be, and draw as well on you're deeply passionate about your country. You come from a lineage that's an integral part of what Tonga is, and we've probably skipped a whole phase of the story in a sense after you chose to go back or Dad called you and said come home. But this kind of technology, I'm assuming, is unbelievably exciting to someone like yourself from a perspective of helping your country.
Completely. I can change the destiny of my country forever. So let's see what that looks like if you save that 30%. So that's 70 million. That's 70 million of new disposable income that the Tongan populace didn't used to have. So if everyone in the country, and trust me, everyone in the country, even the royal family, receives remittances. So if everyone in the country's disposable income goes up by 30%, then naturally they're spending 30% to increase their standard of living. So maybe a fisherman in a village, maybe his kids go to school with breakfast now rather than without, which they couldn't afford before. Maybe they go to school with shoes now. So it's natural to spend it to increase your standard of living. But what happens in Tonga, like a lot of emerging markets, places that don't have a large manufacturing or professional base, they don't have a large income tax paying base. So that in order to make everyone pay tax, even village fishermen and farmers who are in a cash economy, they impose a consumer tax. So you impose 15% GST, VAT, consumer tax, whatever you want to call it, on everything. That means even if you're not paying income tax, you're still paying consumer tax because everyone's got to buy stuff. So if everyone in the country has 30% extra disposable income, that's a $70 million injection of capital into government's 15% tax that wasn't there before. So the money that goes to build hospitals, roads and schools from that 15% gets a $70 million bump as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first win is that people's disposable income goes up, so their standard of living goes up. The second win is that government gets that injection of capital because people are going to spend that money into the economy. So they get an injection of capital in the consumer tax, which goes to fund public spending.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third win is eventually that village fisherman is going to go, you know what? This full $100 is great, but I actually used to get by on the 70. It was hand to mouth, but I got by. What if we budget and get by on the 70, and then for the first time, not just the first time in his life, for the first time in anyone in his lineage, they've got the chance to have savings,
Wow.
which was never even contemplated before, because it was always hand to mouth. Now that extra 30%, that can become savings. And savings are the foundation of generational wealth. Okay.
Wow.
So whether it's savings.
So what a story. I'm loving it. Thank you for explaining all this. It's mind-blowing, the opportunity to help people,
right.
isn't it? It's really mind-blowing. So okay, let's keep
going.
But
that's not just the win, because remember, the savings of that 30%,
mm-hmm.
it's not 30% in USD that's melting at 5% per annum. That's 30% in Bitcoin that's appreciating at a CAGR rate of 200% per annum. So the 100 in savings he's got this year, it's going to be worth 200 next year, 400 the year after. That's just going to keep appreciating in value. So that's a quadruple win.
Oh, it's massive, isn't it? And so I'm sure there are some challenges. A lot of people will tell
you, 100%.
Bitcoin is a scam, and there's all the usual FUD.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest hurdles you face as a parliamentarian in Tonga trying to explain the importance of this technology for the ability of people on the street to improve their lives, but then equally to improve government and just generally the well-being of the country? Seemingly, it's a win-win. But it's not always the case that people see things the same way as yourself. So what are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing?
Those two, what you mentioned about the scam, and what's not uncommon even in sophisticated OECD countries is the fact that if you don't understand money, then you're going to find it hard to understand Bitcoin at first. True. You need to have financial literacy. So what we did was we began in June last year in just doing financial literacy workshops, just financial literacy, to teach you that money is a vessel of your time and energy, that if the money is being printed by a centralized party with entrenched interests, then you have no control over your time and energy, because the vessel of your time and energy, someone else controls its supply, someone else controls its purchasing power, and someone else controls its value. That's a central bank. And someone else controls the distribution. That's a commercial bank. So you have to ask permission to touch your time and energy. And there's always a third party custodian standing in between you and you expending your time and energy. So until you understand that, then you won't understand how Bitcoin fixes that by removing the central supplier, because the supply is already hard coded at 21 million, and removing the central supplier dictating price and purchasing value, because that's determined by Bitcoiners. Whatever we're willing to pay for Bitcoin, that's what the price of Bitcoin is going to be. All the users in the network determine the price. And then the commercial bank, who controls distribution and charges you 5% every day, the $5 trillion that moves daily, they charge you 250 billion in transaction fees just for housing the computers on which those transactions occur. Now that you have Bitcoin mining, we, the users of the network, validate our own transactions, and we take the fees for validating those transactions as a block reward. Therefore, we're no longer reliant on a third-party custodian because it's a peer-to-peer technology. Yeah, there's no intermediaries. There's only the sender and the receiver. So by seeing that, then they can understand, all right, so I can fly from here to London with $2 billion in my head. And as long as I have a phone at Heathrow that has an internet connection, I can access that 2 billion.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? I totally agree with you in terms of the education that's required. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so we did that. And then secondly, what we found through trial and error is that Moon Wallet and Wallet of Satoshi are the best onboarding wallets. Why? Because one, they're non-KYC. Yeah. And when you're in a emerging market country, not a lot of people have driver's licenses and passports. Yeah. So it's non-KYC, and it's got the consolidated balance of on-chain BTC, Lightning Sats, and USD Fiat, all in the one consolidated balance. So it's easier to get your head around. Yeah. And it's easier for a no coiner or new coiner to get their head around 20,000 units of something in their hand rather than 0.0000001 piece of Bitcoin.
Yeah, the unit bias is funny. It does tricks. Even if you know about it, it still does tricks.
Yeah, if Coinbase denominated the BTC they're selling in sats tonight, their trading would quadruple, their volume would quadruple tomorrow, because people would then get rid of the unit bias and understand that $100 being however many thousand sats in Bitcoin is worth more than $1,000 in Doge.
It's funny how difficult we find that calculation. And you log into Coinbase for the first time, and it's like a casino essentially. What do you go for? And there's a huge education piece here. Absolutely, you're right, and that's really one of the driving forces behind starting this podcast, is just to have conversations. And what's brilliant about this is the perspective that you bring, the use case that you bring to the table. I'm British, living in Australia. The use case for me was wealth protection, so a store of value. First and foremost, that's why I was interested in Bitcoin. But there's so much more going on in and around this monetary network that I don't know about, and that's what's so exciting about this. So let's keep digging if you're okay. So are you okay for
absolutely.
time? We keep going.
So the rollout would be with Naib's playbook. Naib Bukele.
Yep.
And my good friend Luis Rodriguez, who's the head of the central bank in El Salvador. Their playbook is the way to go for emerging markets.
Wow.
So first,
and so just for context, for anyone listening, if you're into Bitcoin, you would know about this, but El Salvador is, really the pioneer of small countries adopting Bitcoin as legal tender, and Nayib Bukele is the leader. And so you've obviously been in direct touch with the government officials there to learn about how they did it. And wonderful. So they're now openly sharing that process with you guys. And what does that look like then, if you were to try and follow the same process?
Yeah, so fortunately, they've been openly sharing since May last year. So they actually sent me an early version of their bill before it became law, so that I could begin modeling my bill on it. So the first step is to answer the GDP remittance dependence question. So you have to provide Bitcoin on Lightning as an alternative to Western Union. So that means you need a way for them to receive Bitcoin on Lightning, and you need a way for them to off-ramp it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So we'd initially thought to do Bitcoin ATMs. Then we had concerns about constantly refilling them with fiat and them being tied to fiat in any way, just as a matter of principle, didn't sit well with me. The sort of black market use, not black market, sort of grey market use of Bitcoin to date has been that I'm not sure whether you heard on the other podcasts or Tonga is 5% ethnically Chinese now.
Okay.
So in 97, when Hong Kong was going back to China, there was a large capital flight of merchants, Chinese merchants into the Pacific, looking for safe havens for their money. In the early 2000s, a lot of poor Guangzhouese from Guangzhou, the southernmost province in China, came after them as their workers. So it got to a stage in the early 2000s where ethnically Tongan retailers could no longer compete with the cheap goods that the Chinese had access to from China. So the upshot is, by around 2010, there hasn't been any ethnically Tongan retail stores since then.
Wow.
What's the relevance of that for Bitcoin? Those Chinese merchants, a lot of them will accept your Bitcoin because they know what Bitcoin's worth, and they're assuming that you're an uninformed Tongan villager who had some sent to you by a relative, and they'll take your sats at a very cheap price and stack theirs themselves and have a bit of a giggle while you think you got a good deal by getting a can of Coke for 0.02 Bitcoin, when in fact you just paid a couple of $1,000s for a can of Coke. So they've been accepting it informally for a while. If the Reserve Bank, the central bank, caught them, there is a case for saying you're effectively acting as a broker or an exchange, therefore you've been acting as a financial services operator without a license. Yeah? On the other hand, at international law, when a sovereign nation declares their currency under the UN conventions, it's incumbent on every other country to accept those currencies as a foreign currency. So Australian dollars by law have to be accepted in the US as foreign currency. You have to be allowed to go to a bank and change them. So since September 7th, when Bitcoin became legal tender in Ethiopia, strictly speaking, at international law, it has to be accepted as a foreign currency in every country in the world.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I've been following this.
So, cool. Yeah, so that would be a very cogent and meritorious reply from the Chinese merchant. To get around all that, I took a controlling interest in a US bank with a business partner. So we have a banking charter out of the US, which means we have a Federal Reserve backed fiat bank that we're turning into a crypto bank. So what does that mean? That means that we have a Visa card that is accepted in 160 countries. And we've tied that Visa card to our DeFi multi-chain wallet, which means Tongans can receive Bitcoin Lightning payments to that wallet and spend it through the Visa card natively as if it was fiat. So they can spend that in Tonga or anywhere in the world that takes Visa.
Wow.
So I solved the off-ramp problem, which was giving us headaches. How are we going to off-ramp the Bitcoin so that it's going to get around all Tonga's KYC AML? Because once it's Visa, every government accepts Visa because their central bank assumes Visa's already done the KYC AML.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay? So instead of having to comply with 160 countries, you just comply with Visa and they get you in the door everywhere else.
And just for context then, so I'm in Brisbane, I'm sending $100 via the Lightning Network in Satoshis to my brother back in Tonga, and he now has an account with your bank, which is able to take that Bitcoin deposit and essentially allow him.
He doesn't even need an account with the bank.
No.
All he needs is a Bitcoin wallet. He can choose what Bitcoin wallet he wants to connect to that Visa card.
Okay, so you just offer the card. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, he doesn't have to get, that's like that Wirex card that they get out of Singapore.
Yeah.
You can have the card. You can open an account with us if you want, but we don't want you to not have access to the card just because you don't have an account.
Yeah, fair enough. Wow, I love it. And as you know, someone really passionate about entrepreneurship, this is brilliant, right? You know, spotting problems, solving them, and helping people in ways that, you know, improve lives, save costs, make things faster, make things harder, make things cheaper. It's just amazing.
And what we've added, which is the DeFi part, which we believe is the game changer, is that we have multi-chain, multi-blockchain, ACH Visa nodes. So you in Brisbane can buy the node off us, and when you send the money to Tonga, not only are you not paying Western Union to send it, but the Visa network will pay you the merchant fees because you own the node for sending the remittance to Tonga, as if you're a merchant.
Wow. Okay.
So you'll get paid.
So you're plugging into their network essentially.
Yeah. So you get paid to spend your own money.
It's an interesting idea.
So
Yeah,
all the users. So if you take your Visa card to the store and swipe it, and you usually wait for the girl to smile because she's seen approved from the bank come through. When you own the node, it's your node that she's checking when she swipes the card. So not only do you validate your own transactions, you get the merchant fees that would otherwise go to the bank.
Wow. It's very exciting.
So you're getting 5% back on every transaction you make.
Yeah, rather than the other way around. Yeah, that's great.
Rather than, exactly.
It's very exciting to think where this is all going. My brain almost kind of, you know, gets a bit pickled and overexcited because there's just so many different options and possibilities that I see. I want to slightly change direction because this is another really fascinating part to the impact Bitcoin can have, and that is really to talk about Bitcoin mining and the potential for it in somewhere like Tonga and what that means for sovereignty from international organizations or other countries. Talk to me a bit about that.
So after GDP remittance dependence, the second step is, of course, legal tender, because we need them to be able to save and transact in the remittances they received. So the legal tender bill goes up in October. When it's passed, it'll most likely be January by the time it's promulgated as an active law. And that means that they can transact in Bitcoin. But with my Visa card, they don't even need legal tender anyway, because they can spend the Bitcoin natively as if it was fiat.
Okay.
So we can almost skip the legal tender part. We won't, because we want to give everyone the option. Right. The next step then is, of course, volcano mining.
Awesome.
So if Bitcoin is the apex predator asset for an individual to own, then the most sensible relationship for an individual to have with the apex predator asset is to have a way to make his own, which of course is mining. So it makes the most sense to be the Bitcoin Holy Trinity, which is buy and hodl at least 10 Bitcoin, run at least 2 to 4 Bitcoin nodes, and then be mining at least 2 to 4 petahash of Bitcoin miners. So if that's the case for an individual, then why would it be any different for a nation state? It would be even more important for a nation state to do that. So volcano mining in El Salvador is super efficient. The technology there to turn essentially the steam from geothermal wells into electricity is fairly well established. Now, why is that relevant to Tonga? Because Tonga's got 21 volcanoes. So Tonga has 21 volcanoes for a population of only 100,000. That's one volcano for every 5,000 people. So it only takes 2 megawatts of electricity to service 5,000 people. These volcanoes will generate 95 megawatts of electricity each. So at 100,000 people requiring 2 megawatts for every 5,000, that's 40 megawatts to run the whole national grid. Our volcanoes will give us 2,000 megawatts. So we'll have 1,960 megawatts with nothing to do. So the companies that own the hardware and tech that are doing the volcano mining in El Salvador have offered, because you know the Bitcoin community is weird. They like seeing underdogs win. So they've offered us for free all the hardware and the tech and the maintenance to do volcano mining in Tonga. Okay. So they'll put everything up, do all the installation, get it up and running, do maintenance as is needed as time progresses. So that means 21 mines, 21 volcanoes running mines, but enough electricity to also run. Do you know what a hash hut is?
I don't know.
So a hash hut, well, do you know what an ant box is?
I don't know.
So an ant box is a 40-foot container built by Bitmain, the only manufacturers of Bitcoin-specific miners on the planet. 40-foot container filled with Bitcoin miners. So you can spit out between 4 to 14K USD of Bitcoin a day from those. So the people who own that tech are willing to donate one for every family in Tonga. So
wow,
that's only 20,000 families. So 20,000 units to them is nothing.
Wow.
So a Tongan family going from earning $150 a week from subsistence fishing to 14K USD Bitcoin a day from a hash box. That effectively turns Tonga into a little Dubai. Instead of every family owning an oil rig, every family owns a money printing machine. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's
it's pretty sci-fi, this stuff, isn't it?
It's actually more. It's more realistic than you'd think.
No, of course it is.
I showed you,
15 years ago, well, this is something that people don't necessarily dig into on first. Their first introduction to Bitcoin, they don't get this far, but the energy network is a fascinating place to spend a bit of time doing some research.
Absolutely.
It really, really hammers home how interesting Bitcoin is. And there's a number of problems that have existed for a very long time that Bitcoin solves. And it's really around energy generation is highly centralized, but energy consumption is quite decentralized. And different energy generation sources create energy at different times of day, specifically with renewables being sun and wind at different times. So the flexibility that the grid is required to have is incredibly difficult to supply. And Bitcoin mines can basically jump into that gap anywhere in the world and monetize energy sources from previously completely and utterly impossible locations that were effectively off-grid. So you can create money from energy anywhere in the world. And that's never been possible before. And why would you build a huge geothermal unit on the side of a volcano to give to 5,000 people? The CapEx just wouldn't work. But it does work when you can monetize a Bitcoin mine and you then get free electricity and you're making money with an asset that benefits the community. This is a game changer.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's game changing.
Wow.
Also, because only half of the 40-foot container will be in Bitcoin mines. The other half are going to be data centers.
Okay.
So in 2014, we had our fiber optic cable laid in a deal with the World Bank. So my mother was the Minister of Communications at the time. So she's the one who negotiated the deal. But she's too cheap. She still is. She was too cheap to pay for their own lawyer. So fortunately, she had a son for a lawyer who she could use free for the
step up, boy.
Which she did. So after having gone through the materials and seen the comprehensiveness of the deal, I advised her two things. First, ask them why they're hesitant to give us the loan. So it was the negotiations were at the stage where the World Bank was going to go, no, you can't get the loan. And the reason they wouldn't give us a loan is obviously we don't have the requisite economic growth. Therefore, their projections at our ability to service the debt, weren't great. So I asked her, keep asking them to say exactly, so we can have it on the record, on the minutes, why they won't give us the loan. Eventually, it was another lady, not a man, who was opposing my mother. Eventually, she'd had enough, and she just said, "Because you're too poor, you can't afford it." So once she said that, I gave out a sigh of relief, and we went back for a 5-minute coffee break, and my mother was gnawing her teeth about to take my head off, and she's like, what was the purpose of that? And I said, I think you'll find when we go back in that she's going to be really, really friendly, because her lawyer will just have advised her that she just admitted that Tonga falls under least developed nation status. So the LDN status in the World Bank Charter means you no longer get the loan, you just get given the money for free as a grant. If you qualify as an LDN, then they're not allowed to ask you for repayments. They have to give you the money.
Wow.
So we went back in and the woman sheepishly said, yeah, so don't worry about the negotiations. We're just going to give it to you as a grant.
Wow.
And my mother looked at me and like, what? I said, I told you, because my mother believes that I have the attention span and intelligence of a 14-year-old, even at this age. So she was still completely taken aback that it worked. So yeah, so we got the cable for free. That being the case, I advised her, future-proof the network because you will never get a good deal like this again. Next time we're going to have to pay for it. So what does future-proofing mean? It means get enough bandwidth for 1 million people instead of 100,000 people. That way we won't need to upgrade for the next 100 years. So that's what we did. We laid enough cable for 1 million people. So the whole country uses 5 gigabit, but we have about 2,000 gigabit up and down. Wow. Fiber to the door, just sitting there. So what do you do with that? You make a deal with Cisco, which I have, to pre-sell server space. AWS's Southern Hemisphere headquarters are in Sydney, and their server farms are spread across New South Wales and Victoria. 0.01% of that business is worth $200 billion a year to Tonga.
Wow. Wow.
So Tonga's GDP, as I said,
500 million, yeah.
500 million. So we would earn 400 years, 4 centuries worth of economic activity in 12 months.
Wow. Wow. That's fascinating. And it's really it's a story of being nimble, being honest to your country, and wanting to help your fellow citizen, and also being entrepreneurial and understanding, you know, how this might all potentially work.
There's a lot of entrepreneurialness in there.
Yeah, it's awesome. Lord Fusitu'a, I've loved this conversation. Thank you for sharing all of this. What I would like to do as a final question is really draw back to where you started, in a sense, and mentioning that you worked in anti-corruption. Bitcoin is a independent and neutral monetary network that has clearly got an amazing use case to empower the individual, such as the fishermen that you mentioned, the unbanked, 60% of Tonga unbanked, the diaspora sending money home, and then equally the ability of monetizing stranded energy assets like your volcanoes to potentially create data center businesses, or you know, just generally monetize assets that weren't previously possible in remote locations like what Tonga is. Saying all of that, you've obviously spent a lot of time in the kind of, let's call it like international political space, and some of these quite, or I should say, powerful organizations. What does Bitcoin mean in that perspective? Like, I always hear FUD like, you know, Putin uses Bitcoin, you can't use Bitcoin. Or equally then the process of like, you know, I'm sure that you'll tell me dollars is the biggest currency used, but
Bitcoin is great. In those worlds,
like, you don't see a future in which corruption is embellished by the use of Bitcoin. It's a different beast altogether, right? But
no,
how does it blend together?
Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, because they're pseudonymous, they aid in tracking down illicit financial flows.
Correct.
Because now it's almost impossible to own any cryptocurrency that's not tied to an exchange. Okay? Miners still make up a minority. Most of the 150 million people on the planet who own cryptocurrency have bought it off an exchange like Binance or Coinbase, through an account that is tied to a passport or a driver's license. So tracking down crime with Bitcoin is extremely, extremely easy compared to trying to trace cash money. The currency of crime, I can guarantee you, is cash money, because when I walk in to Harrods and I pay for whatever it is, bottom Macallan 25 worth a couple of grand, that guy doesn't know that my corner boy in Trafalgar Square slinging rock on the corner, those are the dollars that I picked up from him that I'm paying for the Harrods stuff with, because cash is completely anonymous. So I've been to where the South American cartels don't count their money in counters because it's impossible. There's too much fiat. They weigh them in 18-wheel semi-trailers that they run over at the DMV, those places where they've got the weighing trays for trucks. So they know how much 200 billion weighs. So the truck comes across the machine, the weight in tonnage goes up or down, and they can tell you how many billion to about the $10 or $20 plus or minus accuracy on how much cash is in there. So if you just go through the fines and indictments for HSBC alone, just one bank in the past decade, you'll see the money of crime is cash money, and Bitcoin is no match for it. The fact that the owner of the Silk Road was caught by tracing his laptop to him as he was trying to access the blockchain shows you how non-anonymous it is and how pseudonymous it only is. Russ Ulbricht got caught trying to access the blockchain.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm personally of the opinion that there needs to be more no KYC Bitcoin encouraged.
Absolutely.
It's important that it's important that citizens of the world are able to interact with each other without anyone knowing about it. Now, I'm not saying I want to be a South American drug cartel, but equally, if you don't agree with the government, like, freedom of speech is a critical part of life, and it's been sadly ignored in too many places of the world lately. And if we end up in a world with digital currencies that are completely traceable, then acting in the best interest of yourself, which happens to be not in the interest of your local government, will be much, much harder. So it's definitely a balance, isn't it? But great context in terms of, it's just complete horseshit, isn't it? When, here we are, we're talking about people getting 30% of their money back because the old system sucks balls. People being able to take energy assets that have been there for generations and monetize them in such a way that it's basically going to empower you for generations to come. And then there's just the amount of crime being conducted on the network is minimal because there's only a $1 trillion value versus the cash money world that is just infinitely bigger. So awesome.
Not even comparable.
Lord Fusitu'a, plenty of your time has been taken this evening, so thank you so much for sharing all of these details. It's been a fantastic journey. Last question is really, where can people reach you if they want to get in touch and find out more about yourself?
Yep, I'm just at Lord Fusitu'a, one word, LORDFUSITUA, on everything, any platform you can think of. I'm Lord Fusitu'a on there, so very easy to get hold of.
Cool. And any parting comments before we close out?
I think I was just heartened by a couple of things. The Miami conference, I was super heartened by the effect that Lightning is going to begin having as it becomes even more ubiquitous, as you saw with Jack Mellor's demonstration.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, how can we not be moved by the ability of Bitcoin to save entire nation states? Without Bitcoin, the Ukraine would be in a very different position as to being able to control its destiny today than it would have been otherwise. So yeah, super bullish, 100%.
Awesome. Well, Lord Fusitu'a, thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's been a great time, great to chat, and yeah, hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. Thank you, Jake. I really appreciate the invitation, and 100% look forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you.